Okay, so the first thing we need to discuss in this chapter will be energy. So the body needs energy to perform all types of work, whether it be running, jumping, anything from heartbeats or digestion requires energy. And so on the cellular level, we call this cellular work, and this includes all energy requiring activities inside the cell, such as building molecules, repairing structures, and transporting substances across membranes. So, when we look at the definition of energy, energy is the power derived from food to perform this cellular work. It can exist in many forms: chemical, mechanical, electrical, heat, solar, even nuclear. The law of conservation of energy states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. However, it can undergo transformations, changing from one form to another. And so, this concept is critical because our body can't create energy. We must convert it from one form to another. So, for example, body cells take chemical energy stored from food and transform it into usable energy forms such as ATP. And this transformation process is constant, so our cells are always releasing, transferring, and using energy to keep us alive. Now, human cells release chemical energy from macronutrients like carbs, fats, proteins, even alcohol. And the energy in the food is measured in kilocalories, or what we call calories on our regular generic food label. Now, only macronutrients can be used for energy because they contain chemical bonds that can be broken down to release energy. Vitamins, minerals, water don't actually provide any energy because they lack these energy rich chemical bonds. Instead, vitamins and minerals act as cofactors or coenzymes, helping enzymes perform metabolic reactions. Water assists in hydrolysis reactions, so breaking down chemical bonds, but it doesn't supply energy itself. Right, so think of ATP hydrolysis, where we have a molecule of water, and as a result, we have ATP broken down into ADP, inorganic phosphate, and that free hydrogen ion. Now, metabolism refers to the sum of all chemical reactions occurring within the body that allows us to obtain and use energy from food. And these reactions take place through specific chemical pathways. They're organized sequences of enzyme-driven reactions, right? So these pathways let us access and convert the energy2 in biological fuels like carbohydrates, fats, proteins. And so the two of the major energy pathways we'll focus on will be the glycolytic pathway as well as the citric acid cycle, or you may have heard of it as the Krebs cycle. Now, energy metabolism is how the body releases energy from macronutrients and then uses that energy to build, repair, and maintain tissues. And so every time you eat and digest food, your cells are preparing to either break down molecules to release energy or use that energy to build something new. Now, when we look at catabolism and anabolism, we have catabolic reactions, which are the pathways that break down large molecules like, say, your triglyceride into smaller molecules like your glycerol and fatty acid. Or you could even go as far as breaking down your glucose, fatty acids, amino acids into smaller particles like carbon dioxide, water, and usable energy. Now, part of that energy is captured as chemical energy in the form of ATP, while the rest is actually released as heat energy. And although heat energy can't perform cellular work, it does play a vital role in maintaining our core body temperature. Now, anabolic reactions do the opposite. So they actually build larger molecules from smaller ones. So, for instance, building glycogen from glucose or triglycerides from fatty acids and that glycerol backbone, proteins from amino acids would all be examples of anabolic reactions. Go in the opposite direction, so breaking down glycogen to glucose, catabolic. Proteins to amino acids, catabolic. So large molecule to small, catabolic. Small molecules to a large molecule, anabolic reactions. And so these anabolic reactions require energy input, which is supplied by ATP generated from catabolic reactions. So we break down, say, food and are able to generate ATP, usable form of energy, and then that ATP is broken down to release energy so that we can build our protein from amino acids. So metabolism is a continuous transfer of energy between these two processes. So the catabolic and anabolic processes. The energy released from catabolism fuels anabolic reactions that maintain and rebuild the cells of the body. So, for example, the body can break down glucose to release energy, and that same energy can be used to synthesize new proteins. And this constant exchange keeps our cells alive and functioning efficiently. Now, nearly every chemical reaction in the body requires an enzyme to make it happen at a rate fast enough to sustain life. Without enzymes, most metabolic reactions would occur far too slowly to support cellular function. So enzymes are biological catalysts, meaning that they speed up reactions without being consumed or necessarily changed in the process. And once the reaction is complete, the enzyme is free to potentially act again, kind of like a reusable tool that continues to facilitate multiple reactions. Now, enzymes are highly specific, so they're often designed to act on one particular substrate or within one particular metabolic pathway. Now, many enzymes can't function on their own. They actually require the help of coenzymes to catalyze reactions. So coenzymes are these organic helper molecules. They are often derived from vitamins, and they temporarily bind to enzymes and assist in transferring atoms, electrons, or potentially functional groups during a reaction. And in simple terms, you could think of an enzyme as a machine, but the coenzyme is the key that helps turn it on and keeps it running efficiently. Now, many B vitamins serve as coenzymes or are essential parts of coenzyme structures. So, for example, niacin or vitamin B3 forms NAD, or the electron transporter NAD, which carries electrons in energy metabolism, which is we're going to see very important when we are, say, looking at producing ATP. Then you have riboflavin or vitamin B2, which forms FAD molecules, which also carry key electrons or perform a role as a key electron carrier. Now, thiamine or B1 also acts as a coenzyme in carbohydrate metabolism. And this is why B vitamins are so important for energy production. They don't supply energy directly, but instead they enable the metabolic machinery that converts macronutrients into usable energy. Now, energy inside the body, again, is constantly being transferred between molecules during metabolism. And this transfer happens in the form of electrons, which carry energy that can later be converted into usable forms of ATP. However, these electrons can't move freely. They need to be transported safely between the molecules until they reach a system that can use their energy, such as the electron transport chain that we will cover later, but we see as an important component of the ATP produced through the oxidative system. Now, because electrons are negatively charged, they're almost always accompanied by positively charged hydrogen ions to keep a neutral balance. Now, together, these hydrogen electron pairs are what our body moves around during energy metabolism. And so you can think of it as an energy packaged in the form of hydrogen atoms. And this is what's being transferred between compounds. Now, the body uses two special coenzymes to accept and transport these hydrogen ions and electrons. You have nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD+, which is the niacin-containing coenzyme derived from vitamin B3. And then you have your flavin adenine dinucleotide, or FAD molecule, which is a riboflavin-containing coenzyme derived from B2. And so these coenzymes act as energy shuttles carrying high energy electrons to other reactions where ATP can then be produced. Now, the NAD plus molecules are going to pick up a pair of hydrogen ions and their associated electrons as well to form your NADH molecules. And then you have your FAD molecules that does a similar or participates in a similar process, picking up two hydrogen ions and their associated electrons to form FADH2. And these reduced forms, your NADH and FADH2, are now energized carriers that will deliver the hydrogen ions or hydrogens with the electrons to the electron transport chain, allowing energy to be transformed into ATP. For now, just remember your NAD and FAD molecules are essential carriers to make energy, or to make energy transfer, I should say, possible. Now, adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is the primary energy currency of the cell. So every cell in the body relies on ATP to perform work, whether it's contracting a muscle fiber, transporting ions, synthesizing proteins, or fueling cell repair. So think of ATP as money in the bank, right? It's how the body pays for all of the energy requiring tasks inside the cell. Now, chemically, ATP is composed of adenosine, which is going to include the adenine and ribose molecules that you see in the image. And also, we have 3 phosphate groups attached in a chain, hence the name triphosphate, tri meaning 3. And these phosphate bonds, particularly the last 2, are called high energy bonds because they store a large amount of potential energy. And this energy comes from the breakdown of macronutrients, which is then captured and stored in these phosphate bonds of ATP. Now, when a cell needs energy, it breaks one of those hydrogen, one of those high energy phosphate bonds through a process referred to as hydrolysis, meaning splitting with water, right? So we need a molecule of water. So the enzyme ATPase catalyzes this reaction where we have ATP plus H2O leads to ADP plus an inorganic phosphate, a free hydrogen ion, and energy. So ATPase facilitates the breakdown. ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, is formed when one phosphate is simply removed, right? So we broke that bond, so you have an inorganic phosphate, and now only 2 phosphate groups are attached to that molecule. So now we have di meaning 2 instead of tri meaning 3. So the energy released here is used for anabolic activities like rebuilding muscle tissue or active transport across cell membranes or nerve signaling. Now, there are different types of ATPases because they are specialized for different cellular tasks. So, for instance, your myosin ATPase powers muscle contraction by providing energy for cross-bridge cycling. You have calcium ATPase, which helps pump calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum when the muscle is relaxing. You also have sodium potassium ATPase, which maintains ion balance across cell membranes, which is critical for nerve and muscle function. So each of these enzymes allows ATPs that are stored energy, or ATP's stored energy to be transformed into either mechanical or electrical work needed for movement and cellular activity. Now, the process of ATP cycling represents how the body constantly earns and spends energy at the cellular level. So think of it as working so that you can go buy food, right? You work so you can make money and you spend that money on food, but now you're out of money, so now you go back to work so that you can spend it on food. Well, cells break down ATP to release energy for work and then immediately begin rebuilding it so that the energy supply is never interrupted. And this cycling between ATP to ADP back to ATP is continuous and occurs thousands of times per day in each cell. Now, to reform ATP from ADP, the body uses a process called phosphorylation, which is an anabolic reaction, meaning that it's building something up, right? So during phosphorylation, we are taking a phosphate group and reattaching it to ADP. So we have 2 smaller molecules joining together to reform a larger ATP molecule. However, this process requires an input of energy because forming that high energy phosphate bond takes work. And so you can think of it like recharging a battery. The cell must invest energy to rebuild ATP so it's ready to power the next cellular process. Now, when the high energy bond in ATP is broken, energy is released to perform cellular work such as muscle contractions, again, active transport, uh, biosynthesis, so building proteins, enzymes, hormones. And once ATP is broken down into ADP and inorganic phosphate, the cycle restarts. So ADP must be re-energized through phosphorylation to form ATP again. And this process is, again, vital for every living cell. Without ATP regeneration, energy dependent processes would come to a halt within seconds. Now, ATP can be resynthesized through three major pathways depending on the energy demand and duration of activity. You have your substrate phosphorylation, which occurs during glycolysis in the cytoplasm, and the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle in the mitochondria. And your substrate phosphorylation involves the direct transfer of a phosphate group from one molecule to ADP. Now, you also have oxidative phosphorylation, which occurs in the electron transport chain within the mitochondria, and this is the primary ATP producing mechanism during aerobic metabolism. It generates a large amount of ATP using oxygen. And then you have your creatine phosphate donation, which we probably won't discuss too much, but this is going to be a rapid energy system used in short bursts of high intensity activity where the creatine phosphate donates its phosphate directly to ADP, forming ATP almost instantly. So you have your phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate energy system, you have your glycolytic energy system, and your oxidative energy system. Now, as far as the roles of the cellular structures, you have the cytoplasm, which is where glycolysis begins. Glycolysis is going to be the initial breakdown of glucose, and the first few ATP are going to be produced here. And this will be it for, say, anaerobic glycolysis. Now, the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells. Everyone's heard that phrase. And so this is where the majority of ATP is actually going to be synthesized through aerobic metabolism. And so together, these systems ensure that the cell can meet both immediate and long-term energy demands efficiently. Now, the key difference between aerobic and anaerobic metabolism comes down to one specific factor: oxygen availability, right? So every cell in the body needs ATP to function, but how the ATP is made depends on whether or not the cell has enough oxygen at that particular moment. So aerobic metabolism refers to the metabolic pathways that require oxygen in order to produce ATP. This process occurs primarily in the mitochondria, which acts as, again, the cell's powerhouse, power plant, if you will. So when oxygen is readily available, aerobic metabolism is the body's preferred and most efficient energy system. Although it does take longer to produce ATP through aerobic metabolism, the amount of ATP generated is so much higher compared to anaerobic metabolism. So, for example, one molecule of glucose can yield about 38 ATP aerobically versus just 2 ATP anaerobically. Now, when oxygen supply is inadequate, cells switch to anaerobic metabolism, meaning ATP is produced without oxygen. And this takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell instead of the mitochondria. And you have your anaerobic metabolism, which provides energy very quickly, but it's not sustainable for long periods because it yields much less ATP per molecule of glucose. Additionally, what we see is that this pathway produces lactic acid as a byproduct, which can lead to muscle fatigue if it accumulates. Lactic acid doesn't actually exist in human physiology. For it to exist, our body's pH would be so low, we'd be dead. So what we actually see is the accumulation of lactate and hydrogen ions, and it's these free-floating hydrogen ions that reduces the acidity in our arterial blood, and as a result, we see fatigue occur because of the accumulation of hydrogen ions, not lactic acid. Just a quick fact. So in aerobic metabolism, we have a high capacity to produce a lot of ATP, but at a very low rate or very slow. So it's efficient but slow. And then you have your anaerobic metabolism, which has a low capacity. We can only produce little ATP, but at a very high rate, right? So it's fast but short-lived. So for a practical example, if we looked at light to moderate exercise like walking or jogging, your muscles receive enough oxygen to rely primarily on aerobic metabolism, but during intense, say, explosive activities like sprinting or lifting, oxygen delivery can't keep up, and so your body temporarily has to rely on anaerobic metabolism to meet the high energy demand. Now, once oxygen availability catches up, metabolism can shift back towards the aerobic pathway.